Local programming on KRWG made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Fronteras, a Changing America. I'm Edmundo Resendez. On today's special Fronteras, we are looking at the issue of immigration. For years now, immigration reform has been at the center of many debates, none of which have brought comprehensive immigration reform into law. My guests today are here to put a face to that debate. Nuestras voces, voices of immigrants on Fronteras, a Changing America. My guests today are Johana Bencomo. Welcome to Fronteras, a Changing America. You are a community organizer with New Mexico Communidades en Accion y CAFé, otherwise known as CAFé. Ms. Lauren Armstrong, who is a local immigration attorney with Las Cruces offices of Noble and Verapi. Welcome to Fronteras. And Elizabeth Castrejon, Southern Field Organizer for New Mexico Dreamers. Welcome to Fronteras, a Changing America.
Thank you.
Let's start out the conversation by putting a voice or face to modern-day immigrants in our community. Let's start out with you, Ms. Armstrong.
Well, I'm an immigration attorney, as you mentioned. I got my license to practice law in 2010, so I've been practicing for about 7 years now. I've represented hundreds of individuals. I've represented children as young as 6 and elderly folks about 86 years old. So my clients really run the gamut in terms of age, background, life experience, but I think what unites them all is a desire to have a better life for themselves or their families. I represent many parents who struggle with how to tell their children that they can't go on a field trip to White Sands because it's on the other side of a checkpoint. I work with survivors of domestic violence. I've worked with survivors of human trafficking who have overcome so much tragedy and trauma in their lives that it's very inspiring to help them through a process that gives them protection and stability in their lives. So as I said, I do work with a broad range of individuals on a broad range of immigration cases, but I think daily I'm inspired by my clients, and I think that desire to contribute to society, to community, and to take care of family and take that responsibility is kind of a consistent characteristic that I see in my clients.
For you, Johana, what are the faces of modern-day immigrants?
You know, as a community organizer for CAFé, I've been doing this work for almost 4 years now, and it's such an honor and a privilege to get to know people who are undocumented and for them to share their stories with me. And honestly, it's people like all of us. People, undocumented folks, are praying in our churches. They're going to school. They're shopping in our grocery stores. We are, contributing to every single piece of what makes this community wonderful. They're students at NMSU. They are students at DACC. They're picking our food and working at the dairies and our pecan groves. And but beyond that, right? I think they're parents, and like Lauren said, they're people just wanting to make a better life for themselves. And I know that all too well. I myself am an immigrant. I am from Chihuahua, Mexico, and so for me, immigrants are my tios and my tias and my parents and people that I love dearly, and that are really no different than anyone here.
Elizabeth, for you are work for the New Mexico Dream Team. What are the faces of the immigrants that you deal with?
If the organizer with the Mexico Dream Team, I've been working with a lot of immigrants, dreamers, and I just see normal people that wants a better life. They're students, like Johana said. They're just parents. I see a lot of power, strength in them. They have been through a lot of pain to be here, and just see how they're constantly in fear. Try to be so powerful for the kids, just be strong so the kids do not have to fear. I just see a lot of strength in them, and they're so humble. I grew up in Ciudad Juarez, and for me, it's all my people, and I just love them,
Let's talk about issues that immigrants face today and bring it to you, Ms. Armstrong. What issues do immigrants face today?
Because we're in a border community, I think freedom of movement is a major issue that our clients contend with because we are almost surrounded by checkpoints. If you go north, if you go northeast, northwest, basically if you're traveling anywhere other than between El Paso, you're probably going to encounter an immigration checkpoint. And because of that, clients who are undocumented or even clients who are in the process of getting status but there's a lapse in work authorization are unable to travel. And I think that takes a toll on people's safety, on their ability to work, to travel for family, to travel with their children for necessary medical treatment. So the freedom of movement is definitely an issue that our clients contend with. Also, work authorization is another hurdle that many clients have to get over. In a current renewal for work authorization can take over 6 months. So people who are timely filing to renew their work permits are finding that there's lapses in their work authorization. People are losing their jobs. And so this is a very real concern for people whose families, their home, their vehicle, everything depends on maintaining that one sacred job that they have. And so maintaining continuity in work authorization is a very central issue for many of our clients.
This question goes to both Elizabeth and Johana. Johana, how difficult is it to get these undocumented immigrants to come out of the shadows, to get them to talk to you and to share with both of you their background and where they come from, and to literally come out of the shadows and not be afraid?
Just takes a lot of time. I've been organizing for almost a year, and it took me a really long time for them to trust me and be able to share this story. I was patient. I was waiting for them. They need to be ready to share this story. It's not easy, and they need to feel that they have an organization or someone that's gonna be supporting them, because they fear that if they share their story, Border Patrol or ICE are gonna be after them. So we need to make sure that let them know that we're there to support them and that their stories are powerful.
What about you, for Johana?
Yeah, I think that living in a community like ours that is a border community, that we're heavily militarized by both Border Patrol and ICE presence, and we're also a small community, I think for people it's really hard to trust folks, like Ellie said, and be able to share their stories. But you know, what community organizing is all about is for us to make private suffering public, right? And so I think for a long time, like Ellie said, it takes a lot of relationship building and patience, and helping people understand that if we don't own and share our stories in a powerful way, someone else is going to share them for us. And we've seen the true impacts of what that could be, right? With administration that is very much very much dictating the narrative on immigrants. And it's not just a narrative, right, that makes us feel bad. Those things become policy and have really real consequences on really real people and families. And so, it's right on what Ellie said. It's about helping people understand that their stories are really powerful, and at the end of the day, our stories can transform hearts and minds.
Ms. Armstrong, this question, I've been thinking about this question because it's part of the ongoing debate, but when was the last time we have had comprehensive immigration reform that was passed in this country?
Well, it's been well over 30 years. I should caveat that by saying there are different acts. For example, the Violence Against Women Act, which was passed in 1990 and then goes through periodic reauthorizations. So there are different acts that do impact immigration laws and policies, not comprehensively, but on specific subject areas that will go through various regulatory review processes and updates. But that being said, comprehensive immigration reform, yes, it's been decades. And I think most people on both sides of the political spectrum would agree that the current system we have right now is problematic. For example, a U.S. citizen petitioning for his or her brother or sister who happens to be from Mexico is facing a backlog of over 20 years.
20 years.
20 years.
Okay, so this again goes to the facts and the myths of like, why don't they just become citizens? Why don't they just come through the legal process?
Right.
It's a 20-year waiting period.
Yes, if you are from Mexico and your U.S. citizen brother or sister is petitioning for you, doing it the right way takes over 20 years.
And
the reason for that, to provide some context, is because the government authorizes, I should say, a certain number, there are numerical limitations on certain categories of family members. So those who are not immediate relatives, meaning not spouse, minor child of a U.S. citizen, for example, but are in different preference categories, siblings of U.S. citizens, are subject to numerical limitations. And so because there are far more people applying through those categories, those family-based categories, than visas available, it starts a line. And that line is now 20 years long to get through the backlogs for someone to go through the final steps of the process and obtain their residency.
with that in mind, how does merit-based immigration affect immigration for the people that are trying to come out through the legal process?
Well, there are many ways to get status in the U.S. One of my coworkers likes to use the shorthand term blood, sweat, and tears. So blood being family-based relationships, immigration through a family-based petition. Sweat, employment, work-based visas and programs like that. And then tears, humanitarian protections for survivors of crime and victims of domestic violence and other forms of trauma, as well as asylum seekers and unaccompanied children. So on the merit-based system, we're probably talking more about employment-based processes. That is handled primarily by one of my coworkers in our Albuquerque office. So I don't handle the large volume of the employment-based cases, but I can say from our experience, we've seen heightened scrutiny even in the employment-based cases that are being filed now under this new administration. So in many ways, the immigration system is kind of divided up into the mechanism through which the person is applying. So I don't think enhancing merit-based immigration in and of itself is good, bad, or otherwise. But I do think the real focus for the bulk of individuals here is going to come down to humanitarian or family-based protections.
Johana, what made you decide to get in the field of helping out immigrants? It would seem that it's such a heart-wrenching issue when you deal with people that are being deported. You are currently involved with 2 sanctuary cases. Can you tell us about those?
The 2 sanctuary cases? The Holy Cross Retreat Center here, run by Franciscan Order of the Catholic Church, was the first Catholic community in the country to open its doors to immigrants seeking refuge. And Father Tom calls this Franciscan hospitality, right? Like, this just lives within his values to protect people. In June, Jorge Taborda went into sanctuary after he was basically attacked by ICE. Him and his family. So his wife and his oldest son are all from Colombia. They came here seeking asylum in the 90s. They'd been in the community of Las Cruces for almost 20 years. Jorge and Francia were both self-employed. Jefferson Taborda graduated from New Mexico State University with a criminal justice degree last year. And they had a 15-year-old order of deportation. And ICE essentially stuck them for a couple of weeks, and I laugh, but it's not funny, and but that's really what happened. And they found him, they detained his wife, she was deported in June back to Colombia. Jefferson was eligible for DACA, so he's in the process of waiting for that. And then and Jorge is currently in sanctuary, fighting to be able to stay here with his other U.S.-born child, who's 15. Marta Lorena Rivera came to us just a few weeks ago. Very different story. She's from Alamogordo. She's been in this country since 2002. She has an 8-year-old U.S. citizen daughter, a 22-year-old DACA recipient daughter who is about to graduate from UNM, and her 25-year-old son, who just became a U.S. citizen earlier this year. She's been getting stays of removal, which Lauren, I'm sure, can elaborate on what those are, but essentially it's relief from deportation under the previous administration, the Obama administration, there were certain priorities set for people to be deported or not deported. And she was not one of those priorities. And so she'd been receiving these stays of removal since 2011. And she went in for her ICE check-in this year in October, and with no reason or explanation, the officer in charge of her case told her her application was denied and that she was going to be deported right then and there. She basically begged to be able to go back to Alamogordo and take care of, her 8-year-old daughter and sort of get her affairs in order. And they put an ankle monitor on her and told her to report that next Monday. And she called us and said, I'm looking for help. And so she went into sanctuary.
What is the next step for her?
For Marta Lorena, we want to refile her stay of removal and working through the offices of both Senator Udall, Senator Heinrich, and believe it or not, Congressman Pierce to see if they can advocate on her behalf for this stay to be regranted. We know that that's going to be very difficult. The El Paso sector is one of the strictest sectors in the country and are not granting any stays of removal. She also, her son, who just became a U.S. citizen, petitioned for her residency, and they received confirmation that is in process now. But given her history, that's actually going to be really difficult, and I'm sure Lauren can explain much better than I can why. But given that she has a previous order of removal, that might not actually be very easy. But right now, she's in sanctuary with her 8-year-old daughter, both of them at the center.
Lauren, why is that case? Is that case fairly common across the country today?
Yes. It's hard to speak to the grant rates and denial rates of stays of removal in other field offices across the country, since the bulk of our clients are going through the El Paso field office. But a stay of removal is a discretionary decision by ICE to essentially defer someone's removal from the country for a period of up to 1 year. You can't ask for more than 1 year at a time. And so the folks who require stays of removal are those who have previously been ordered removed by an immigration judge in immigration removal or deportation proceedings, or it could involve somebody who was given, say, an expedited removal at the border if they were apprehended trying to enter the U.S. without documents and were processed there at the border for a removal without seeing a judge. So those are usually the most common situations that give rise to an outstanding order of removal that somebody has. In those situations, if somebody's encountered in the U.S., the way that they're viewed as already having been ordered removed, the job of ICE is to simply effectuate that removal order. And so then the case takes on a very defensive procedure where you're just stopping to fight the removal. And so these are discretionary stays, as we mentioned. The few clients who we have had stays granted for are those who have pending or approved U visa applications, meaning they were victims of crime here in the U.S. They've been helpful with law enforcement. They've suffered substantial harm as a result of their victimization. And there's been some type of determination made by Citizenship and Immigration Services that they have a strong case, an approvable case, and that has weighed in heavily in favor of granting a stay, although they are still very rarely granted. And I think what's perhaps most upsetting for us as advocates is we have individuals who have children with severe medical conditions, or individuals themselves who have severe medical conditions and really require adequate treatment, here in the U.S. to not be in a detention center where there is not adequate medical treatment for many conditions. And those are cases that oftentimes are denied, and so people are faced with very life-changing decisions of whether to seek sanctuary, where, when, and how to self-deport, and all of those are issues that we confront with our clients.
Ellie, for you're dealing with people that have and know no other life other than the life they've lived here in the United States. With the recent announcement by President Trump that DACA will be ending in March, what are some of the fears that DACA recipients are expressing to you?
Deportation. They just fear that once their permit is expired, they're going to be deported because they're already in the system. It's one of the fears they have, and then they don't know they're not from here, but they don't know Mexico. They don't know or the country they're from. It's just like something unknown for them. So they fear because they know there's violence. They don't know how they're gonna survive, where they're gonna work, where they're gonna live. So it's just the fear, not knowing what's gonna happen to them if they get deported.
Is there hope that DACA will get a fair hearing in the Congress and signed into law by President Trump?
Well, the Clean Dream Act is currently what I would say we're all fighting for. I wouldn't do this work if I didn't ultimately believe there was always hope. I always think there's hope, and even though this administration is certainly scratching at that. But I think for us, for advocates, I think we can't compromise, we can't give up. It's hard to say with this administration what's going to happen, given that things change from one day to another. I hope so. Yeah, I hope that, I think these young people have been here their whole lives. This shouldn't even be a debate. Giving them a pathway to citizenship should not even be this kind of a debate, let alone talking about exchanging their freedoms and their liberties for their parents' freedoms and liberties, right? And that's what, when we talk about a Clean Dream Act, we talk about how to ensure that these young people are protected, and we don't continue to criminalize their parents, and we don't continue to militarize communities like ours that will put their parents at higher threat for deportation. So, for us, I don't think we get a luxury to say we're going to give up and hope for the best. We don't have that luxury. We have to keep fighting to ensure that something does happen.
Ellie, have you noticed that with current DACA recipients, are they more vocal, or are they still living in the shadows of fear of deportation?
They're more vocal. Most of of our members, at first, I have some that didn't want to tell me that they were DACA recipients. They were like, no, I have some kind of permit, but I'm legal here. I'm like, okay, I was patient. But now I just see them like just telling their story. They feel powerful. We're not hoping. We know that if we continue with this, with everything that we're doing, we're eventually gonna have a Clean Dream Act. Just as we fought for DACA, we're gonna keep fighting for a Clean Dream Act. And they have that hope, and I should see that they're not fearful anymore. They're sharing their stories and fighting for what they deserve.
Lauren, has there been a current enforcement, an uptick of immigration, or is it just more visible under the Trump administration? And how does it differ from the Obama administration?
It's hard to say. I think some of the issues that we contend with, such as backlogs, things like that, have been going on prior to this administration. I think Johana can probably speak more specifically in terms of enforcement on the ground in communities, so I'll let her take that part of it. But I do think a big change has been that under the Obama administration, there were fairly clear priorities that Johana had mentioned earlier. There was a memo that had been issued by then Secretary Jay Johnson that basically laid out priorities 1, 2, and 3. Whether you agree or disagree with who should be in priorities 1, 2, and 3, there were some ground rules, some common understanding, so that as an advocate, you can bring those priorities, those guidelines into the discussion with the government counsel when someone's in removal proceedings, with ICE when someone's requiring a stay of removal, and say, hey, this person doesn't fall into these categories, or they fall into categories 1, 2, or 3, but there are mitigating circumstances, which were also laid out in that memo. That's since been rescinded, and so all we have now is language in some of the executive orders that, to speak bluntly, basically makes everybody a priority. So it's very hard to find ways to delineate or to prioritize maybe who should be given a little bit more discretion, a little bit of leeway in terms of granting some reprieve from removal, allowing somebody time to process an application that would give them status. So I think that's the major change that we've seen as legal advocates, and it's been very challenging.
So has there been an uptick in immigration enforcement?
Absolutely. We're, as advocates, we're under no false idea that, immigrant communities have been struggling for a very long time, right? President Obama deported millions of our loved ones. However, this administration, I believe, has launched a full-on assault on immigration and immigrants, both undocumented and legal migration. On January 25th, President Trump signed an executive order that dramatically changed the way enforcement is handled in the interior of the United States. Like Lauren said, the biggest thing is that before, I believe there was like 1.4 million people at priority for deportation. Under the Trump administration, 11 million undocumented immigrants are a priority for deportation. We have been in meetings with our local ICE leadership and a couple NGOs, and they have told us that they have directive that any person who is undocumented that they encounter, that those folks will be up for deportation, regardless of the roots they've set in this community, regardless of the amount of years they have living here, if they have children in the United States, any of those things, it seems like are no longer mattering. I
hate to interrupt, but let me just interrupt real quickly by asking, in your meeting with immigration authorities, do they act or feel more emboldened as a result of the rhetoric that exists regarding immigration?
That's a hard question for me to answer. I've been in meetings with local Border Patrol leadership. And I sit with folks that are very well trained on messaging and media, and so I think they tell us what we want to hear. But I certainly think that these two agencies are emboldened by this new administration and sort of giving them free rein. Border Patrol and ICE already were problematic agencies to start with, but this administration has certainly sort of giving them handcuffs off, essentially.
At this point in time, I'd like to open up the floor to our guests who might have a question or a comment regarding the issue of immigration. Welcome to Fronteras, a Changing America. Today we are discussing voices of immigrants. If you have a question or a comment, please feel free to step up to the microphone and state your name and where you're from.
Susan Fitzgerald from Las Cruces, and this is for Lauren. From your experience in immigration law, how would you craft legislation that would protect the undocumented population?
$1 million question.
Well, I'll just focus on one thing that is very challenging for me to walk through with families, and it's something called the permanent bar. This is a penalty that exists in family-based immigration systems. And this is kind of getting back to the reason why some of the cases that Johana mentioned it seems like there should be something for this person. They have a U.S. citizen, a grown U.S. citizen son or daughter to petition for them, brother, sister, spouse. Why can't they just go through that process and get status? So the permanent bar is a penalty that exists for somebody who was in the U.S. without status or overstayed a period of stay that had been authorized to them on a temporary permit, who accrued more than a year of what's called unlawful presence, meaning visa overstay or without status. You leave and re-enter a second time without status, you've triggered what's called the permanent bar. So this could be somebody who came in 1984, lived here until 4 years ago, a family member died, they had to go back to their native country, returned again without status. They have then triggered the permanent bar. And so for somebody who even has a family member who can petition for them, when they get to that next phase where they're applying for lawful status, permanent resident status, they are subject to a ground of inadmissibility that's called the permanent bar. The only way to cure that permanent bar is by leaving the country for 10 years and then seeking permission or consent to reapply. There are waivers for other types of grounds of inadmissibility or other penalties, but for this particular bar, that is the only cure. and leaving the country for 10 years and then hoping that you're granted permission to reapply and come back in is not a viable solution.
Johana, is that even feasible? To leave the country for 10 years? To go back to a country you no longer know?
I mean, think about it. You left possibly decades ago. You no longer have a home. And now you have roots here. You have children. In some cases, you have grandchildren, right? I mean, think about leaving for 10 years just on an off chance that you might be able to come back. That's just not
I can't
an option
leave for vacation
people.
for 10 days and come back to the job and treat it as though nothing's happened. Let's go back to our floor. Welcome to Fronteras of Changing America.
Hello, my name is Carol Bushik. I live here in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and the United States of America. I would like to make a comment or two that would hopefully help prevent, in the minds of the people, acceptance of any wholesale deportation of immigrants and refugees. I would like more education put out to the public, reminding them about the fact that they are all descendants of immigrants and refugees. I myself have immigrants in my ancestry all the way from the Mayflower to my mother's grandmother, who was brought over from Ireland as an indentured servant. I believe everyone needs to be reminded, as they speak so often when they make new friends and talk about themselves and their lives, that they are descendants and that their descendants all came here openly and freely. Number two, I would like to see that people are educated on the facts of our immigrants and our refugees today, what they are contributing to our society, what they bring with them that strengthens our country. I once saw a magazine a while ago that was about how much income, how much of the economy is contributed to by our immigrants. I hear too many people. I come originally from an area in the Midwest where I hear an awful lot of people who say that the immigrants, particularly the Mexicans, pay no Social Security, get free health care, get free education. And this is misinformation that they have. We need to get more information out to the public that is the truth, not only our everyday public, but to the people who are supposed to be in our leadership in our governments, state and federal. And I think that this is an area we need to focus on to help move ahead, change people's attitudes, inform them, and so that they recognize what the truth is and stop these mass deportations of the wonderful people that come to be a part of us.
Thank you. So how do you overcome perceptions? Let's look at facts. Let's look at myths. All three of you deal with these facts and myths throughout your careers. How do you overcome these perceptions that exist in the media and the rhetoric that exists with politicians? Johana?
That is very much a thing that happens every single day, and I think this is where the power of story comes in, right? This is where us talking about specific people and what they've encountered, and having them share their own stories. That's why it's so powerful. And the thing about these myths, this hateful rhetoric, these lies that get told about me and my people and our communities is they're not just things that hurt our feelings. They are things that become policy. They are things that have very severe consequences on the lives of people. And we certainly need to, in organizing, right, provide that counter narrative and be able to say that this is who we are, right, and for people to actually see us. But it goes beyond educating our neighbors. It's calling on our members of Congress and calling on our elected officials to really see the truth and calling them out when they're speaking untruths.
Elizabeth, for you, in dealing with DACA recipients, what are some of the issues and some of the things that DACA recipients must follow in order for them to benefit from DACA?
Well, there's a lot of requirements. They need to have a clean record, study, and have a job. They need to be good citizens to have DACA.
Do you feel that in the media that exists, that story is being told, that these DACA recipients have clean records, that they must follow certain rules?
It's just, for me, is all those requirements for me is like all of us should have it, not just for them because they need to have a permit to legally be here. It's just that all those requirements they need to face and just to be here is, for me, it's just not fair. An example for me is like a DWI for them could mean deportation. For a citizen, it's just, it's in your record and it's going to stay there. It might affect you in the job or career you want to have in the future, but for them, it's just like the end for them to be here in this country is like deportation. And that's why every time we go to any representative or we do any kind of rallies or anything, any kind of events, we want them to share this story because we want to change that narrative. Because they're not criminals, they're good citizens, and they're helping to the economy as well. And we want to make sure that people know that.
Lauren, what are some perceptions that exist with undocumented immigrants that people may have regarding, one of the things that comes up quite frequently is that they have violent criminal records, that they're criminals. President Trump kicked off his presidential campaign by calling people from Mexico as rapists, drug dealers. Do you see that in the cases that you deal with?
I don't. And I think to circle back, things that we've already talked about, why don't they just go through the process or do it the right way or get papers? And we've talked about these incredible backlogs, right? And how complex the process is with series of penalties and waivers and potential banishment from the country to do it the right way. So I think that's definitely a caveat that we confront in people who very much want to do whatever they can to undergo the process and get status, but it's not that easy and it's not that quick for many people. Right. In terms of, folks who are immigrants who are a threat to society and things like that, I work actually primarily with survivors of crime. And so in my work with many, many survivors of domestic violence, what I see is people who are victimized many times by folks who are U.S. citizens. But because of that fear of retaliation, the fear of speaking out, and perhaps putting themselves in jeopardy, people have suffered in silence. And for that reason, the Congress did pass the U visa with bipartisan support, and it's given status to thousands and thousands of crime victims and survivors who can come out of the shadows. So really, in my work, I'm dealing more with folks who are crime survivors than perpetrators of crime.
Let's look at the cost of getting a green card, the cost of becoming a resident of the United States. It's not inexpensive. It's a very expensive proposition, is it not?
Yes, it is. To get take a simple case, if you have no penalties which require a waiver, you would need to file first a family-based petition, an I-130 petition, and that filing fee is $535. If you can file concurrently with the I-45, which is the application for permanent resident status or your green card, that's well over $1,000, along with biometrics, fingerprint fees, that's $85. So those are the government filing fees. If you choose to have an attorney assist you, you're going to encounter legal fees as well. If somebody does require a waiver, that has another filing fee of close to $1,000. And I do think the backlogs and the amount of time that it takes and that people's lives are put on hold, there's a loss there. There's a opportunity cost in terms of how much longer it takes for someone to get that work permit or get status and contribute and work for a living wage. And so those are also costs that we discuss with our clients. And so it's a very long and emotionally draining journey for many of our families we work with.
Johana, I just did some quick math. It looks over $3,000 just to start the process. In your experience, do you see some of the people you work with as having that kind of money just to become residents?
No. I mean, you know, it's interesting because people leave usually their countries of origin because not just a lack of opportunity, but like a severe lack of opportunity with poverty and violence in many cases, right? And they come here and just to make a good buck, right? And in New Mexico, there's already a lack of well-paying jobs, right? And so folks are working in places like the dairies or picking chilies or onions. Students are working multiple jobs to be able to pay for school already, right, on their own because they get no federal financial aid. So even like a DACA application, that's, you know, almost $500. That's a lot of money for some of these families that, you know, that are maybe already struggling financially. And I mean, I certainly wouldn't be able to afford that right now, right? I think for anybody, those costs would be pretty high.
Elizabeth, I mean, for the DACA recipients that you deal with, they've already invested a lot of money just to become DACA recipients. If they were to literally pull the rug from underneath them in March, what's to become of them? I mean, after having invested this kind of money to become DACA recipients?
Well, for them, I mean, just think about it. Their struggle to get this money to apply for this permit, and even though there was a lot of organizations helping with the money, there were some of them that before the announcement, they pay for the application, and then after March, it's just like a waste of money, and the fear after that of what's going to happen to them. And like Johana said, our community doesn't have that kind of money, not even 500. It's just hard. They have money to pay for their own things. And
Lauren, what are some current estimates regarding how many undocumented immigrants reside in the United States? I hear the number go from 11 million to upwards of 16 million. Is there any way to tell?
I think I might defer to Joanna on that one. You know, I think it is hard to tell, and I think part of the reason it's very hard to put a number on this is because we also, some folks who are not familiar with immigration law think you're either U.S. citizen or you're undocumented, when in reality there are many shades of gray. There's a spectrum of immigration status. So someone who may have no status may have some type of protection deferred action, like DACA recipients, or somebody who was granted other types of deferred action through humanitarian protection. You might have a temporary non-immigrant visa that authorizes you for X amount of time. You may be a permanent resident, or you may be a U.S. citizen. So I think depending on how you're measuring who's considered an immigrant, who's not authorized to be here, it gets a little bit tricky. And I think that's where probably part of the reason why there's a wide range in statistics.
Let's go to our audience. Welcome to Fronteras at Changing America.
Hello, my name is Manuel Arellano. I was born in Juarez. I am proud to show you this. I was brought into the United States on the 7th month, 2nd day of year 58. I want to share a little bit of what I went through. We came legally through great sacrifice from the family. The duration, I didn't really get to know my father till I was 16. He was the last one to come over because we did it legally. 3 sisters, a brother, 2 nieces, my mother and my father and me. I was proud of my father and my mother for doing it legally. I missed them, and I got to know the culture in America. And one of the things I noticed more than anything was that even though we were legal residents, I lived with the word wetback, beaner, you name it, all the stereotypes they could give to my mother. It was hurtful. I, at an early age, decided that I would do everything I could to not be deported, which meant I would live a legal life, something that I could be proud of. And more than anything else, the main driving force in my life has been, how can I pay back America for the life I live now compared to what we were living in Juarez, in that culture, corrupt culture. Everywhere you looked is corrupt. It's very difficult. I can understand illegal immigrants coming over because of the life they live over there. I've tried to help those that I know, even though that might have been illegal. I didn't think it was bad to give them shelter or food. I've volunteered in the school system as much as I could. I spent 25 years teaching kids. I 7 years ago woke up from a diabetic coma in the hospital. Had cancer. None of this would have been able to been beaten had I been in Mexico. I would have died then. I was given another shot at life by this great country. In my own little way, I tried to serve it the best I could by joining the military, serving everything I could, do the best I could. Even after I woke up from that cancer 7 years ago, and I should have died, but for whatever reason I didn't, I haven't stopped trying to give back to America. I have, the last 3 years have been a roller coaster ride for me. I now have a chess association. It's called the Las Cruces Scholastic Chess Association, where I teach kindergarten through 8th grade chess for free. I currently have over 120 students. We will have a tournament next week here in New Mexico State University, and none of this would have been, I wouldn't have been able to do it if I didn't have the promise that America gives us all. My big question is, with DACA being what it is, and all I hear is talk about sending everybody back. These are people that have given like I have, that have worked to be legal, to be good citizens. Why are we sending them back? We know who they are. We know where they live. Why can't we institute a program to make them legal here while they're here, instead of spending millions sending them back so they can go through the hardships when they are citizens? I am not a legal citizen. I've tried to understand why I couldn't file for citizenship. Part of me told me I did not want to leave my Mexican culture. So I waited until it was legal to have dual citizenship. And the irony of ironies, now I can't afford it. I'm on Social Security, I barely make it, but I'm not going to stop volunteering to help any disadvantaged person wherever I can and what I do. And that's the promise that America gives us. That's the light that we look for when we're over there. I haven't been to Mexico in 25 years. You know why? I'm afraid that they won't let me come back, even though I'm a legal permanent resident. I don't want to take those chances. If I'm not going to take those chances, where does that put the rest of us? And that's all I have to tell you guys. I really love America. I consider myself an American citizen and a Mexican citizen, and I'm proud of both. Thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you.
So let's talk about the stories like we just heard. You deal with them, Elizabeth, with DACA recipients. What phase do you want to put to our audience as to who a DACA recipient is?
They're students. They're good citizens. They're helping the economy. They're just like everybody else. And like he said, it's just, I'm not gonna talk just about the DACA recipient, but about all my immigrant community. And Ciudad Juarez is like right in the border, and I grew up there, so I know how violent it can get. And it's just not fair for them to say, you know what, you didn't born here, you need to go back. They were here when they were kids. They're citizens.
What about for you, Johana? What is the face of an immigrant, a modern day immigrant? We talked about this at the beginning of the show. Has it evolved for you as we've discussed this?
No, I mean, when I think about the face of an immigrant, I think about my tia Cristina, who has lupus and can't get a kidney transplant because she doesn't have papers. I think about mothers like Marta Lorena Rivera, who are self-employed, self-sufficient, just trying to give her kids a good life and have done it. Her son is, works for a successful business. Her daughter, who's also a dreamer, is about to graduate UNM and wants to go to law school. Her 8-year-old daughter, Bella, is just like this beautiful child who, doesn't deserve to be living in a place that's not her house. And so all of these people are immigrants, right? Like, sure, maybe her kids may have some sort of protected status, but they will be affected by what happens. And so, like Ellie said, we can't just talk about this one kind of immigrant. I urge everyone here who supports immigrant communities to not fall into this good immigrant, bad immigrant narrative, and those ultimately harm us even more. And so no, for me, those faces remain hard and steady, and they're beautiful faces, and they look like my family.
Aaron, for you, in dealing with these cases day in and day out, are there any cases that stand out for you that are heart-wrenching?
Yes, I think sometimes I joke that I worry more about my clients' kids than I do my own, because I had, becoming a mother changed my my approach fundamentally to lawyering, and I connect very deeply with my clients who are also mothers and who have children my children's age. So yes, I have a client, I'll call her Elizabeth. She is a survivor of domestic violence. She works 2 or 3 jobs to keep everything afloat. She doesn't rely on public assistance, but she doesn't make enough for it to be easy. So she's constantly struggling. Her life is in a delicate balance, and if one thing goes off, it throws her world into chaos. But she's a caregiver for adults with disabilities, and in filing some of her paperwork with immigration, she does have prior removal orders, so she has a very huge uphill battle to overcome. She'll require multiple waivers. And so she gathered a number of letters of support to show that she merits a favorable exercise of discretion. And reading those letters from people in the community, it's very touching. People who say, she is so amazing with my husband or with my son, someone who I feel so frustrated with, and she's just so calm and just smiles and gently, explains how she has kids of her own, or she's just happy to be here. And so it's those rich contributions and that perspective that I see every day when I hear, these sacred stories of our clients. And I carry those with me. And I think the thing to keep in mind for folks who maybe aren't familiar with mixed status families, where maybe someone's a citizen, someone's undocumented, someone has DACA or green card, that the whole family feels that sense of insecurity. And that instability, it's very debilitating at a very fundamental level, right? Your basic needs, transportation, housing, sleep, love, support. When you're at risk for deportation, all of those things come under assault. And so that has a very huge impact on our clients' lives.
Is there a silver lining to the immigration debate? As we close this up, let's start out with Elizabeth. Is there a silver lining for DACA?
Right now, we're not fighting for DACA anymore. We want something more. We want a clean dream act. We know that we can win something, but it's just not DACA. It's just not about the dreamers. It's about the original dreamers, about the parents. And there is a silver that we may win, we may not DACA, but the thing is that that's not enough for us right now. So it's just not DACA. It's the Clean Dream Act what we want, and we're gonna fight for that.
Johana?
You know, this last year has been pretty awful in this work, and I'm a person of faith, and that always, you know, sustains those really hard moments, and working with other people of even deeper faith, that happens. And I will tell you that what I've seen in the last year from our community here in Las Cruces and Doña Ana County is how people have shown up for each other. So Jorge and Lorena, Lorena sprained her ankle while she was there, and somebody from a local church came and gave her a massage. There's people providing free acupuncture, free therapy, people just showing up for each other. And that is something that I have never seen before, and it is absolutely beautiful. So in this fight that will be long and hard, I would say that that's the silver lining, that somehow we're creating this beloved community that's more about inclusion than it is exclusion.
Lauren, in 20 seconds, is there a silver lining?
For me, the focus is on citizenship. Folks who are here who can apply for citizenship, there are fee waivers if you're low income, to take that last step, and so that you can vote in the next election.
Thank you for joining us for this Fronteras special edition. I'm Edmundo Resendez. Nuestras Voces, Voices of Immigrants, with DACA set to be debated in the Congress and comprehensive immigration reform always on the forefront of the debate. The issue of immigration is ongoing and always changing. I would like to thank my guest, Lauren Armstrong, who is an immigration attorney, Johana Bencomo with New Mexico Communidades en Accion y CAFé, and Elizabeth Castrejon with New Mexico Dream Team, and the audience who participated and shared their stories for being here today on Fronteras, a Changing America. Thank you for joining us.